Hello, I'm David Gozzard and I'm from the International Centre for Radio Astronomy Research at the University of Western Australia. Today I'm going to be talking about how to use astronomy diaries to help students understand basic astronomy concepts. So for a few years I've been helping teach a first-year introductory astronomy unit called Our Solar System. It typically runs at about 140 students and normally has lectures and a couple of astronomy nights. Now, as educators, you're probably all aware that students come to a course with preconceptions. And where these preconceptions differ from how reality actually works, they can be very hard to correct. And often they can also be very hard to detect. I can tell my students that the day-night cycle is caused by the rotation of the Earth. It's not the sun moving through the sky. And then if I ask them in an exam, what causes the day-night cycle of the Earth, what causes the day-night cycle, they can respond, the rotation of the Earth causes the day-night cycle. Job done. Well, no. One year we phrased the question differently. We gave them this question. If you could see the stars during the day, this is what you'd see at midday on a particular day. The sun is near the constellation Gemini. Near which constellation would the sun be located at sunset? Pause the video and see what you think the answer is. Anyway, the answer is Gemini. And if you got that wrong, don't worry, you're not alone. Concerningly for me, at the end of the semester, 83% of my students got this question wrong. Sitting in a lecture and being told how the sky works doesn't get the concepts across and a true understanding across to a large fraction of the students. So we needed to look into a better way of teaching this material. So we decided to trial using observing diaries. Observing diaries are widely used in fields such as ecology, where they want students to hone their observational skills. So we decided to get the students to record their own night sky observations every week over the course of the semester. The idea being that by making this work self-directed, it would make the students take responsibility for this work and engage more with the material and engage active learning rather than just passively sitting there in a lecture. But mostly we wanted the students to see what was going on for themselves and hopefully gain a deeper understanding by actually observing what was going on. We went through the literature to find out how to best implement an observing diary. We let the students pick their own format so that they could exercise their creativity, hopefully increasing engagement. We showed them examples. We showed them how to use astronomy apps to help guide them around the night sky. We set compulsory observations, such as observing 4 sunrises or sunsets, 4 observations of a planet moving against background stars, and 4 consecutive daily observations of the moon. We also gave them the marking rubric at the start of the semester, so they had a clear idea of what was expected. To see how well the diaries helped the students, we gave them a pre- and post-course test, and this test included an astronomy diagnostic concept test that included questions like the one I showed you previously and others that test a student's understanding of basic concepts, and an attitude survey that asked them to rank whether they agreed or disagreed with statements such as astronomy is irrelevant to my life or scientific skills make me more employable. We were then also able to compare these results to another class where we didn't use the astronomy diaries. And what we found is that the class with the diaries did do better in the concept test. The difference wasn't as big as we would have liked, but it did help. The class with the diaries also gained a more positive attitude towards astronomy. There was this disconnect where science was seen as different to astronomy and that astronomy was less useful. But the class with the diaries, the concept of astronomy, their attitude towards astronomy caught up to science. And we also saw a lot of great creativity and effort from many of the students doing these diaries. We also had a look at how students fared in the diaries compared with how they fared in the exam. And you can see from the amount of scatter in this exam versus diary marks, that a student who did well in one didn't necessarily do well in the other. these observing diaries can be very beneficial to students who don't perform well in traditional assessments such as exams. We also got feedback from the students, and several of them sent in messages saying things like, "I'm grateful for the early mornings and late nights that made me aware of the wonders of the sky," or that it was a fun task, and despite being reluctant to do it, I found it rather interesting and enjoyable to do. We did also get some negative comments, though fewer. The students who sent in negative comments found the assessment inconvenient to do, and they didn't see the point of doing it. But the majority of students did see this as a very positive and interesting thing to do. So based on our own work and based on other literature and research into the use of observing diaries, we have some recommendations for how to optimally implement an observing diary in your teaching. Set compulsory observations, and we recommend 4 observations of the time and position of 4 sunrises or sunsets, 4 observations of a planet moving against the background stars, and 4 consecutive daily observations of the phases of the moon. Run a guided observing session so that you can take the students out and show them what kind of things they should be looking for and what your thought processes are. And do this as early in the semester as possible, because once a student has started doing their own observations, they very quickly get into a routine and don't like to change the way they're doing things, even if it's not a good way of doing things. The diary is a big effort on the part of students as well as on the assessor. And so to reflect that effort, the diary should be 20% or more of the weight of the entire unit mark. And that marking needs to emphasize analysis of what they saw. A lot of students just turned in diaries that just had observations and no reflection or analysis, that didn't chain the observations together to see how the sky had changed over time. And to encourage the students to do that, encourage them to do drawings, draw what they think is going on, such as the position of Venus or the moon relative to the Earth and the sun, or what Saturn's doing, things like that. Get them to draw diagrams. Drawing diagrams has been shown to be very beneficial in helping students understand the concept. And give them an indicative mark early in the semester. For example, when you finish the compulsory observations, collect up the student diaries, assess them, and give them an either early or an indicative mark to help them, to help guide them and maybe change their processes or what they're doing. Now, there's a lot of information here, and this paper on our research is published and freely available in Physical Review Physics Education Research, published earlier this year. So if you'd like to see more details on how to implement these things and best practices and what we learned, go and check that paper out. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to any questions you have for me.